1, 2, 3.
While our weekly shows are edited to time for broadcast on public TV and community radio, we offer to our members and podcast subscribers the full uncut conversation. The following is from our episode on Illinois successfully ending cash bail. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our members' supporters.
You hear a lot about cash bail and bail reform, but what is it exactly, and what happened when one state stopped using cash bail? That's the question before us today. The U.S., it turns out, is almost alone in the world using a for-profit cash bail system. It's a practice that allows those who can muster the cash to buy their freedom, while those who can't languish in jail. It also makes a mountain of money for a handful of private bail corporations. Does bail keep the most dangerous criminals behind bars before sentencing, as we're kind of led to believe? Well, according to the Harvard Kennedy School, 2/3 of the more than 750,000 people held in locally run jails across the U.S. have not yet even been convicted of any crime. Some states, like New York, are moving to reform pretrial bail, but none had achieved outright abolition until Illinois did, back in 2021. Governor Pritzker signed the Pretrial Fairness Act in February of that year. It went into effect in September 23. So how did Illinois take that step, and what's been the surprising result? To talk about that, we have journalist Bryce Covert, who wrote about Illinois' experience. With support from the Pulitzer Center and the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, her article appeared recently in The Nation magazine. And joining us from Illinois are two people directly involved in the passage of the Pretrial Fairness Act. Sharon R. Mitchell Jr., Cook County Chief Public Defender, was the lead policy expert for the Coalition to End Money Bond. He heads the state's largest public defender office, and State Senator Robert Peters, who's actually joining us from Germany, represents Illinois' 13th district and chairs the State Senate Labor Committee there, which just passed legislation expanding worker protections for Black and Latino temporary workers. Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to have you. First, let's start with you, Bryce. What drew you to this important story?
Thank you for having me on. I have been following efforts to reform bail for years now. I wrote a story for The Nation magazine back in 2017 about the harms that it caused and the nascent at the time efforts to try to change the practice or even get rid of it. And so when I saw that Illinois had, in fact, taken this historic step to abolish it completely, I really wanted to just go see it for myself. So I was able to go to Illinois and sit in courtrooms and observe what was happening in Cook County, where Chicago is, and in some outlying areas, just to get a sense of how it's all playing out. And essentially what I found out is that it's working really well.
Well, we're going to hear more details about what that looks like in just a minute, but let's start with what cash bail actually is. And for that, I'm going to come to Chief Public Defender Sharon Mitchell. For those who have been fortunate enough not ever to be wrapped up in the system, how does it work? What is it?
Yeah, so before 2023 in Illinois and across most of the country, when a person is arrested for an offense, they quickly will go before a judge. And the judge makes a decision about what happens to that person during the pendency of their case. And oftentimes that decision is based upon a cash bail amount, where a judge will say, you are eligible to be released, but only if you pay X amount of dollars. And what we know is whether you are a person who believes that the criminal legal system is far too big, you see that people languish in jail, not because they've been determined to be too risky, just because they can't pay. If you're a person who maybe looks on another side of it, thinks, well, people are getting out not because they've been deemed to be safe to get out, whatever that means, but only because they have access to money. So you saw really critiques from multiple sides. So that's why Illinois decided through the leadership of both elected officials, community members, policy experts, and really just regular folks the system was broken and it needed to change. And that's what we did with the passage of the Pretrial Fairness Act.
State Senator Peters, just to be clear, there are two possible moments, aren't there, where bail can be offered? Is pre-trial and pre-sentencing? Do I have that right? And what brought you to this story?
We've completely eliminated cash bail or monetary bail. And I think that's what makes us special. I mean, there's another state that's pretty close. That's New Jersey. But in Illinois, we're the first state to eliminate cash bail. And what brings me to this work is before I was a state senator, I was an organizer. I like to put it best that my existence is really caught up in mass incarceration. My biological mom struggled with drug addiction. I got adopted. My dad was a civil rights lawyer and a criminal defense attorney. And so I was both, sort of see this in my blood, in my DNA, and also see this in how I was raised, having gotten calls from Cook County Jail almost every dinner for someone trying to talk to my dad as they were facing a desperate situation. And so then that led me into, through a series of many different things into organizing. And I was proud to be early on in a coalition that included an amazing leader like Sharon Mitchell and so many others.
So let me just to go back to this one more time to you, Bryce. I mean, people's impression is that this setting of bail can happen either before trial or before sentencing in other states. Do I have that right?
Usually it's before trial. It's at this moment where someone has been accused of a crime, but not yet proven innocent or guilty. And in our country, that means that legally speaking, you are still innocent. But there's a question mark about what happens to you before that trial to determine whether you're guilty or innocent can take place. So as Sharon said, in most of the country, what happens is a judge says, okay, you give us this amount of money and then you can go free. It started under this idea that that would help ensure that you come back because you're supposed to get that money when you come back to court. But it's morphed into this idea that judges are somehow setting bail to keep quote unquote dangerous people from going back into the public. These hearings are not, bail hearings around the country are not touching on that question of public safety in a formal way. But it's sort of this workaround. In Illinois, the system, of course, now is completely different. But that's where this is happening. It's when people have been accused, but again, not yet proven guilty of a crime.
So how did it work before 23, Sharon? What was the normal sort of state of operations? What normally happened there in the courtroom?
Typically, a judge had three options. The judge could either, one, release that person with little or no conditions. A judge could hold the person, but that only happened in a very, very small minority of cases where there had to be lots of legal hurdles to be kind of jumped through. And the vast majority of people that came through court got a cash bond. So essentially a judge said, you're eligible to be released, but you have to pay X dollars. And not only were the kind of options limited to those three options or beyond those three options, the time that it took to make these decisions were, some people described it as if, judges and lawyers were acting as if they were ringing the courtroom by the minute, right? So these hearings would happen in 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. There wasn't this deep kind of exploration of what should happen in this case, especially noting that the decision about what happens to a person before trial is probably the second most important decision to guilt and innocence. We know that the outcomes of the criminal case are significantly determined by whether that person is either in custody or out of custody. And we can talk about that a little bit later. And I think the only other point to put to this is when we had a decision where so many folks were making decisions based upon money, it wasn't congruent with what the reality of the system is. And that is the vast majority of people in the criminal legal system are poor. And the vast majority of people who do pay bail are not paying bail out of their own pockets. They're essentially trying to find an aunt or uncle or family member, a church member to pay that bail, right? So it's kind of this Hunger Games of freedom, which is horrible, noting that we're talking about all types of really, really, really serious concerns on all sides.
So while poor people are playing Hunger Games of freedom, as you put it, coming to you, State Senator, there are some people making a lot of money off this system. Can you talk about that side of the story?
Yeah, so I mean, Illinois was unique. In fact, our bail system was not a private bail system, which you have in other parts of the country. I believe in the 70s, got rid of that system and it was a public bail system. And so I would point out, no matter what, it's equally as bad, whether it's a private system or a public system, because it would just incentivize bad actors within the government or within the state to basically charge bail on people. And in fact, the people who might have benefited would be possibly the defense lawyer or the public defender's office or court services, which doesn't actually incentivize safety. It doesn't incentivize making sure that someone has their freedom. What it incentivizes is what they have to do to pay for their budget or a deficit. And what we don't want is to make decisions based off of people's safety, based off of whether you're going to be able to fill a budget gap or whether you're going to get more money in your pocket. And so it's slightly different than it is in other parts of the country, but it was equally just as bad.
I was in Chicago recently, though, and saw the cash bail offices there. I was recently in Los Angeles recently and saw the cash bail offices right outside the jail. Bryce, there are some private corporations making a boatload of money here, right? You say the origins of this whole system are medieval.
Yeah, it dates back to medieval England. Again, it was this idea of trying to get people to come back to court. That's where it all originated. In medieval England, they started making people pay bail sort of as insurance. Again, you get this money in theory when you come back to court. So it's a way of sort of holding you hostage to your future date. And it came to our country with the British colonizers. Again, under the same idea that it was about having people return to court, not flee their court dates. It's in the 1980s in the tough on crime era where it starts to take on this different purpose of protecting the public, of trying to detain people who are supposedly going to go do something dangerous or harmful when they're out. And as you pointed out, Illinois is unique. It did not have a bail bond system, but in most parts of the country, when someone is given a bail amount by a judge, as Sharon pointed out, most people are poor. Most people do not have this money. So they go to a bail bond agency, and that agency pays their bail, but makes the person who went to them pay 10% that they will never see again. It's pretty predatory. As you saw in Los Angeles, these offices are typically all crowded around right outside the jail. That's true in New York, where I live as well. And they make a lot of money off the system and have a vested interest in it. And so when other places have tried to change the system, the bail bond industry typically shows up and lobbies pretty hard against those efforts. I know that definitely happened in New Jersey and in New York. They were able to overcome those in those states, but I think it's a really powerful lobby.
Now, we have seen this story be discussed in broad terms in our political system. Even in this last election, we heard a lot of to and fro about whether Kamala Harris's position on bail reform hurt or helped her campaign. One of the things that I would love you to talk to, State Senator Peters, is how did you ascertain the public opinion on this? Or did you before you get involved? I guess my question is, how popular an issue is reform? Because we hear a lot that it's problematic for politicians to take up this mantle and run with it. Not you.
Yeah, I mean, unlike other Democrats, I understand that you have to shape public opinion around policy. Too many Democrats are a little bit too cowardly when it comes to the public. Meanwhile, when you look at Republicans and what they've done, particularly around immigration, is that they've created an ecosystem that has changed public opinion. I fundamentally believed that if I'm going to take on this issue, which is something that I believe in, I've got to do the work and I've got to be part of a coalition and I've got to organize to create the conditions to make this happen. I mean, look, I will just say, when we think about, this past election, there were a lot of people who were involved in January 6th. The president was involved in criminal behavior. Rudy Giuliani was involved in criminal behavior. They had no problem being able to either pay out or pay within the legal system. Working class people, on the other hand, many of them who are innocent, many of them who are just trying to live their life or trying to move on, they can't. So the difference is a billionaire who's able to game the court system and being able to get out has no business trying to lecture the working class of this country. And so for me, unlike other Democrats, I'm clear about that. I'm able to have that conversation, and I think that the public very much agrees.
Well, I really appreciate that. So not just kind of finger in the air, what's a popular issue, but how do you create the constituency to support change? You were part of that creating process, Sharon. Talk about it, if you will. What did it take to bring together the forces to support this? And who were they?
It was certainly unique in the sense that you had lots of folks from lots of different places coming together to fight for this issue. So whether you're talking about members of the community, not just like people who are professional community activists, just folks that touch this issue, whether you're talking about legal experts, whether you're talking about folks that want to see their communities more safe and their justice system more just. There were just a large group, starting first in Cook County, but as we spread out to the entire state, you saw there were people all across the state that just did not support this practice. I think you brought up a great point about kind of the perceptions of reform and the perceptions of bail reform. And I actually hate the word bail reform, but because it's not very descriptive of anything. When I say the word bail reform, you can get 1,000 different answers. What we did here in Illinois is said that judges should not be using money, should not be using guesses about how much money a person has when they make this incredibly important decision about what happens to a person during the pendency of their case. And really, judges should be looking at all the details, spending their time, listening to arguments, having a clear set of rules before they make that decision. Now, listen, I'm a public defender. We argue for people to be released. We argue for the presumption of innocence. But I also know there are times when there's evidence to where a judge decides that person should be held. The money bond system stopped us from making those real rational decisions and basically amounted to just guesses. Do you have $1,000? Do you have $2,000? Maybe you can contact your aunt. Maybe you can't contact your aunt. Maybe you paid your light bill and you don't have any money in your pocketbook. Maybe you haven't paid it yet and you can forego those things. It was a crapshoot. So when you talk about popularity, when you got an opportunity to talk to people, they really understood it. And really that was across the political spectrum, whether you're talking about folks to the very, very left, to the center, to the right. It was an issue that people really understood why it didn't make sense.
Hi, lovely listeners. Laura Flanders and Friends is, as we say, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a backseat to the people who are doing it. Our guests are doing it. Now we just want to thank you, our member supporters, for doing your part. All of you who have yet to become members, please do it. Join our community today by making a one-time donation or make it monthly at lauraflanders.org/donate. That's lauraflanders.org/donate. Thank you.
And a reminder to hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you. Now back to our full uncut conversation.
So, Bryce, you were in the courtrooms, in the hearing rooms this fall, and you watched some of this process play out. If they're not deciding on the basis of who has the money, what are judges using to decide whether to let people out on bail? What did you see?
What I saw looked nothing like bail hearings I'd ever seen before. I mean, first of all, was just the time taken. As said before, in Cook County, it used to take a matter of seconds. I went to New Orleans in 2017 and saw 20 hearings in an hour. There was no explanation as to why people were given bail or how much they were given. Everyone was given a bail amount. They ranged from $2,500 to $30,000 without a whole lot of explanation. And no one was really able to push back. The defendants themselves weren't even allowed to talk. So I sat in these courtrooms in Cook County, Joliet, in outlying counties. And what I saw was people really grappling with the evidence. Essentially, if the state wants to keep someone in jail who's been charged with a more serious crime before they have a trial, in Illinois, what they now have to do is they have to prove, first of all, that there is evidence that this person likely did what they're being accused of. They also have to prove that they would cause harm to either a person or a community specifically, and or that they would flee their court dates intentionally, which is important because it's not just about forgetting or not being able to get out of work or not having bus fare. And that if those things are the case, there's no other conditions other than putting someone in jail that could ensure public safety or ensure they return to court. And so what I saw was, first of all, the prosecutor in the room, called a state's attorney in Illinois, making these cases, running through the evidence, talking about why this person might pose a threat, why nothing short of jail would do the trick. And then judges discussing that. They were saying, yes, I buy your case. I think that this person should stay in jail, or no, you know what? The evidence is flimsy, or, I think that we can do something other than jail here. These hearings I saw some that took more than 15 minutes, which maybe doesn't sound like much, but compared to seconds, there was one set of hearings where I saw 3 in the span of 2 hours. These are really deliberative and substantive. And also the defendants have a lawyer at their side and the chance to rebut the arguments being made against them, to present their own evidence. And after all of that, if the judge says, for instance, that they should be put in jail, the defendant has an opportunity to appeal that decision. So there's also a check on judges and a further step that people have to assert their rights.
Coming to you, Senator Peters, it sounds like this new situation has changed life a bit for judges and maybe made their work a little bit more interesting. They're learning a little bit more, perhaps, about the people in front of them. How is post-23 Illinois, your community, feeling the change?
Well, I'll just say we had a primary election this year where we had a candidate for state's attorney who I guess you would describe as more tough on crime than another candidate. And what they both agreed was that we needed to keep the Pretrial Fairness Act, which is very different than what you see in other parts of the country. And so I think it's become, sort of the norm. And yet there's still challenges. There are people who want to continue to play games with it because they don't have really much else to offer to the community. And so they keep going back to this well. Fundamentally, I think, we created a higher standard to detain somebody pretrial. The fact that people have to do a little bit extra work to do so, I think, is because the burden needs to be higher if you're going to try to detain somebody. Number 2, $100+ million is coming back into the community or staying in people's pockets instead of going to a county government or to county governments. It's going to specifically to people. And that is important because we have been dealing with higher prices for groceries. So instead of someone having to pay to get themselves out of jail, even though they are not a threat to anybody or to a community, they now are able to go and buy groceries, or they're able to buy their kid a backpack, or they're able to get clothes to put on their back. So to me, that's the most important thing here, is that we created a higher burden. The political environment has shifted, and working class people have more money in their pockets to pay for things like groceries, to help their kid get to school, and to be able to pay for the gas bill.
So has the political atmosphere shifted? Coming back to you, Sharon, looking to the nation, I know that the movement for criminal justice reform, especially the movement that took off after the killing of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement and so on, I know that had a lot of wind underneath its wings. Some people feel that has sort of drifted away or gotten sapped away in the years since. What's your sense? And what's your sense of the national appetite for change, for learning from Illinois?
Well, I'm just a poor lawyer from Chicago. I don't know what's happening nationally. What I know what's happening here is that, there are going to be opportunists. There are going to be people who believe that there is political value in demonizing a change or telling untruths about a change, and that will happen forever. We also know that judges don't have crystal balls. So they didn't have crystal balls before 2023, and they didn't have crystal balls now after the Pretrial Fairness Act. So there will be always people that will try to take individual situations and say, hey, this is the reason why this thing doesn't work. But the reality of the situation is that we did have several local elections for governor, for state's attorney, for state senate, for state rep, where there were people that decided that they were going to capitalize or try to capitalize on this change, and they failed. And they failed pretty hard, right? Because it just makes sense. This isn't just something that comes from just the left or just the right. It just makes sense. One of the things that I've learned as a lawyer, one of the things I've learned as a policy person is many things that exist in the criminal legal system. They don't exist because we've decided it was the right thing to do, that people sat around a table and decided that this was the best way of getting the job done. It was done because the person that was in this job before taught me that it was had to be done that way. And the person before me taught me that was the way, right? This is a great example of a system that was broken and an opportunity to get it right. And I think you've seen over numerous tests, despite people's efforts, that this is going to be a long-lasting change.
So what's your sense of the national picture? Bryce, you've been out around the country. You mentioned New York, New Jersey, I think Tennessee. Like what is happening on this front nationally?
I do think that there has been a severe backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement, to criminal justice reform that's pretty nationwide. The Pretrial Fairness Act has survived the attacks that have been brought against it, but it also was passed in a moment of opportunity just after the uprisings of 2020. And I think a lot of people nationally feel like that huge window that was opened has been shut at least a little bit. A lot of states are going in the opposite direction, making bail more draconian, requiring it more often. Tennessee made it so that judges can't even take a person's financial condition into account when they set bail. They just have to set it without even looking at that question. That said, Illinois is out there doing this, and I think people are taking note. The folks I talked to in the state said they are getting phone calls, they are getting knocks on their door. People are curious about what's going on. When I was out observing court, there was someone from another state there observing as well to go back and report to her government. So as long as this stays in place and we have good data about the outcomes and people keep supporting it and don't give in to the opposition that wants to push to roll it back, then we will have a proof that this can happen, that this can work. And I think when the political tides shift a little bit more, there will be opportunity to do this in other places as well.
Senator Peters, are we finding you in Germany because the backlash has been too strong?
No, actually, what's funny, I was just in Northern Ireland where they don't have monetary bail, and talking to the police and to the prosecutors and to the justice minister in Northern Ireland, just seeing a completely different system. And I don't know if people know Northern Ireland, but it's famous for some serious, violent, sectarian battles that have happened and literally issues that are hundreds of years old. And again, when I describe what we do in the United States to people in places like Northern Ireland or here in Germany, they're usually pretty shocked. And when I look at the record of public safety in Northern Ireland or the record of public safety in Germany, I'm pretty shocked because it's much safer and much easier to walk from one place to another. So to me, I'm here in Germany. I was here last year to visit Hamburg and to learn about their criminal legal system and talk to the police and prosecutors. I'm not like most normal people. I find my favorite vacation seems to be going to visit other countries and learning about their criminal legal system. But what I do get from each time I visit or each time I have a conversation with someone is that I live in the richest country in the world. We should be able to provide people with safety. What we shouldn't do is punish them because they're poor.
So what's the next steps for you, Senator?
I think next steps are, look, I think Bryce is right. Nationally, we've had a tough environment, partially because Democrats in places like New York or California, they sort of gave in to this sort of talking point, unlike in Illinois, where we sort of pushed back against it. And so knowing that we're in this tough environment, I think it's important for us to continue to organize, to continue to build sort of working class power and solidarity, and make it clear that simply locking up everybody and throwing away the key, it didn't work in the 90s when 1,000 people would get murdered in the city of Chicago. And now we're at nearly just over half of that. And it's not going to work now, that there is actually a different way that's possible. And there are places that do it. And I believe that since we live in the richest country in the world, we can provide for people, and we don't need to provide for them in 120-year-old jails.
Sharon, anything you'd add to that? What's your next step?
I think he's continuing to tell the story about the system and why that this system is such a better system than the system that we had before. I will add on to something what Senator Peters said. When I was what called a line public defender, so I was in the courtroom talking to community members, talking to family members. Literally the hardest job I had was talking to mothers and grandmothers and partners about whether they should be paid this $1,000 for bond or $1,000 for rent, right? We were forcibly extracting money out of the people that needed it the most. And I'm so glad that we are now in a system where we realize that we can make these really important decisions without, quite frankly, putting ransoms on people's heads. So we will continue to protect the system. There will always be tweaks to it. People will always try to get a little bit better or a little bit worse. But my thought is that we are in a place where we've been able to prove that this is something that is working for communities far better than the previous system.
Well, as Sharon said, it's the telling of the story is so important. And I want to thank you, Bryce, for telling it. And also point out that you needed help to do that. That you, in your byline, mentioned support from the Pulitzer Center, from the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. Why? Why did you need that help to tell this story? I guess I'm talking about the economics of reporting in these times.
The economics of reporting are not great. Budgets have definitely shrunk, and I think travel budgets have been hit hard. And I will admit it was a little bit of a tough sell to write this story. I think what people didn't realize was that how monumental this is. For some reason, it has not gotten the same kind of coverage as, bail reform in New York has, say, or in California. People just don't seem to know about it, but that's why I wanted to write about it. And truly, I felt the only way I could do that was to go and see it firsthand, to sit in these courtrooms and to talk to the people face to face, like Senator Peters, who made this happen, the people who were harmed by the old system. So I am so grateful for the financial support I got to do that travel and to do the reporting, because I can say I've seen it in action. And it really works. It's a completely different system, but I think so far it's a really functional system, and it's one that is preserving people's economic realities, but it's also preserving public safety at the same time. So I just feel really lucky that I got to go see it.
I'm going to ask you to hazard a guess about why the story perhaps doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
Well, it happened in Illinois. I don't know what people have against Illinois, but I do think the Midwest gets overlooked. But Illinois should really get the kudos it deserves for this law. It is historic. It is groundbreaking. It is like nothing we've seen before. I also think the backlash period that we're in means that stories about success in criminal justice reform are not making as many headlines as perhaps they had been before. But I also think that's going to change. As Sharon and Senator Peters have both said, this is popular. People get it. When you say to people, we are going to make decisions not based on wealth, but based on safety, that just really clicks for folks. I think that's a really key success to why it worked in Illinois, where they were able to pass it and it hasn't had any rollbacks so far. And that's replicable. And no matter what political environment we're in, I do think that's a winning message.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you all, Bryce Covert and the nation, for bringing this story to our attention. Senator Robert Peters, thank you so much for making the time to join us, even from your trip to Germany. And Sharon Mitchell, keep up the great work. Thank you all for being with us here on Laura Flanders and Friends. It's an important story and an important victory.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation from our episode on Illinois successfully ending cash bail. For more information on this episode, check out our show notes posted at patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation or make it monthly. All the details are at lauraflanders.org. And thanks again to all our member supporters.